You're listening to Dodge Movie Podcast. Your hosts are Christy and Mike Dodge, the founders of Dodge Media Productions. We produce films and podcasts, so this is a podcast about films. Join them as they share their passion for filmmaking.
Welcome back, everybody, to this episode of Dodge Movie Podcast. Today we're going to talk about Gregory's Girl, our last film in our month of
Scottish films.
I started thinking of February. Our last film in this month of Scottish films.
Ugh.
This film takes place in Scotland, and it was released in 1980. The director is Bill Forsyth. The stars are John Gordon Sinclair, D. Hepburn, and Jake Darcy. How do you say that? D''RC.
I've always heard it said Darcy.
Oh, just Darcy. You don't kind of emphasize the apostrophe?
That's just how I've heard it pronounced. I don't know.
Okay.
You could say it Darcy, maybe.
Darcy. It sounds like I stuttered. Darcy.
Well, sometimes the apostrophe doesn't mean a glottal stop, so that would be Darcy.
Yeah, no offense to any of our stuttering listeners.
Right.
I love a
Or
stutter.
Mike Allmendinger. As a coworker back in the day who had a stutter.
Okay.
Or Mel Tillis.
Right. No offense to everybody. We love everybody. Okay, the writer is Bill Forsyth, and it takes place, like I said, in Scotland. It was filmed in North Lancashire, Scotland, Glasgow, and Strathclyde.
Strathclyde.
Gregory's Girl is about Gregory, a normal teen who is infatuated with a classmate, and he must work to win her affection. The tagline for this film is, "This has to be the match of the day," or what Gregory doesn't know about women fills a wonderful new comedy.
Okay, I'm not sure it's a comedy. And
this one's really bad. There's a little bit of him in all of us.
that sounds a little creepy.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
So, Mike, kick us off. What is the pickup line for this film?
Well, this is actually, for our listeners, a first. We have no idea what the pickup line is because it's unintelligible. IMDb says that for the American release, they dubbed all the dialogue with accents that were more understandable. I think we got the original version. I think the pickup line is "Where is that?" But we listened to it 3 separate times and have
Still
no
couldn't
clue.
get it. Yep, a first for the Dodge Movie Podcast.
And I hope it'll last.
So, well, it definitely steps on one of our features in the podcast.
Right. The director should know that going into it, that they need to make sure that the pickup line is intelligible for our podcast listeners.
Absolutely. So the opening has very 80s, like late 70s vibey kind of music.
Oh, yes.
And a very Porky's feel almost immediately, with a group of high school boys hiding in the bushes, peeping in the window of a woman, a nurse, I believe, who it appears she's come home from work and she's taking off her nursing gown, to put on sweats or whatever. And
Boobies.
like, I was a huge, maybe still am, but I think I would cringe if I watched Porky's again. I was a huge fan of Porky's and that style of movie. I mean, that's kind of what we were all raised with, but watching it with, my, I don't know if it's older or more aware eyes, is kind of had a creepy feel to it.
Well, I really didn't get a creepy feel on that portion of the film, right?
It's later in the film that you got the creepy feel, eh?
Right. And maybe this is not strictly the case. Maybe optics isn't a strong suit of most people. But if you're at nighttime standing near a window and you're lit and it's not outside, you don't put the blinds down. Everybody knows that you're very well seen. So because of that, it didn't feel like they were being as much creepers, because it's not like they were drilling a hole through the wall a la Porky's, which is a little bit more aggressive.
I see what you're saying. The Porky's kids were putting in a little bit more effort, so they were more, that's what made it extra creepy. These boys just happened upon a window where she didn't draw the blinds.
Right. And
so it's on her.
Well, I'm not saying it's on her, but if you're 15 years old and you're walking through the park and you see that, you stop.
It's like finding a $5 bill. You don't just step over it and keep going.
You don't. But then the person who pulls your wallet out of your backpack and takes the $5 bill,
that's
that person's
an
extra level.
Okay,
right?
Okay. Good. Thank you for putting it in context.
Well, you're welcome.
So early on in the film, I struggled within that first, because after we see this scene, then we see a scene where they're playing soccer. Mm-hmm. And I'm still trying to kind of, because I hadn't read any of the trivia. I kind of go into the movies blind. I don't read anything ahead of time.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it turns out I went into the movie blind too. even though
Not usually. You usually do a little bit of homework, don't you?
I recommended this film because I remember watching Siskel and Ebert's review of it.
Wow.
And they liked it, and I don't know why. So what they described to me in the 5 minutes they had on their show on Sunday afternoons does not match the movie experience I had.
Yeah, a little inside, or what do they say, behind the scenes, inside baseball. Isn't there an inside baseball?
There was, I think. Okay. I don't know if there still is.
So we generally try to pick movies that we have already seen and that we like and that we want to share with you guys. But then I have pigeonholed us by creating these themes for the month that are kind of fun.
I like it. It's kind of fun.
It's fun. It helps us, just, I don't know. It's just fun. So we then had to find 5, because January has 5 weeks. So we even had to find one more than normal movies that were Scottish.
Well, and we can blame the English for this because there's quite a few Scottish films that are really rough to sit through for me because there's been a lot of atrocities over the years, which have been then recounted in films. So, for example, Braveheart and Rob Roy are 2 famous films about Scottish things, which are not really in my wheelhouse, right?
Well, we prefer comedies.
Yeah, a little lighthearted.
Right. There's enough negativity in the world. We don't want to add to it.
Yeah, if you don't have enough negativity, I'm fairly sure you can find some more. But we're trying to be positive on our podcast.
So I'm going to apologize right now because this film and the next film, we weren't big fans of. But we're going to talk about it and tell you guys about it and hopefully entertain you for the next few minutes. But I was trying to get my wits about me and I was trying to figure out, is this kid a high school kid? Is this kid just a young 20-something and this is like a club league? And in that, we see them playing soccer, then they go into the dressing room, and this man comes in, and he appears to be older than Gregory, but I still can't tell, is he another player? Is he...
And this is on, I'm going to say wardrobe, because he's got the kind of mustache that a 15-year-old has. Very light, very... So with his short stature and that mustache, we're not sure, is he the soccer coach, which he is, or is he another student?
Mm-hmm.
We really don't know who this guy is. And so it is a little weird with his interaction. He's yelling at the players.
But when he talks to Gregory, he's almost talking as if he's asking permission. And so maybe that's the funny part, is it sets up for us that he's not in charge. He's not a coach. He's basically, it's almost like he's asking Gregory for permission to cut a player. And then he kind of goes, oh yeah, and that player is you. So was that supposed to be the comedy that he wasn't a coach that just said, Gregory, you're not performing, I'm going to need to cut you?
This is, the film struggled a little bit in this realm. That doesn't make a lot of sense because then later, when the girl is going to be on the team and the headmaster or principal, his boss, says something to him, he's like, oh no, we're going to have a girl on the team, don't worry about it. So that character did not carry through that stammering kind of thing. Now, I have to say, I really did like the opening bit to show us about Gregory when they had lost the game and that person who we find out is a coach yells at him, 8 games in a row you've lost. And Gregory cheerfully says, well, we can't lose them all. And this, of course, harkens back to an episode which I do not believe I've talked about on the podcast. Sergio Risti was a fellow I went to high school with. And before the last game of the football season, my football team had lost the last 6 games in a row. And Sergio was about to start soccer the Monday after this game. And he was kicking the soccer ball around with the soccer team because they'd already started. And the overly aggressive, roid rage, safety captain person of the football team runs over, grabs the ball from him, and says, what are you doing? Sergio says, I'm playing soccer with the guys I'm going to play soccer with in a week. And the captain kicks the soccer ball away and says, what if I told you that you couldn't play tomorrow, Friday night, in the football game? And Sergio looks at him and says, oh, well. And so that very much captured what I felt Gregory's perspective on this soccer or football, as they might say, match was just kind of, oh, well. And that was his approach to life. The plot of this film felt unfinished to me because I never understood why in the first half of the film he was obsessed with a girl who's playing soccer, which made sense. Elizabeth Shue in Karate Kid. She's an attractive girl who does the thing that you like to do. I mean, that makes tons of sense. And then through some machinations that I didn't follow, other girls set Gregory up with a different girl, and we never see or hear of the first girl again. That makes no sense to me.
Well, and I believe, but it's been a few weeks since we watched this, that the girl who they set her up with looked remarkably like the girl that played soccer. And so I think for us, we were kind of like, is that girl? Is that the same girl? Is that a different girl?
Yeah, and there was an interim girl that they used to bridge him from soccer girl to this other girl. Mm-hmm. And again, they didn't show us any of the dialogue that would have maybe explained that, any exposition. Mm-hmm. So that, like I said, it felt unfinished. Mm-hmm. And kind of without resolution. I'm not exactly sure what journey Gregory went on. Did he just kind of fell into a girlfriend? What's the message here? I don't know.
Right. It was kind of all over the map. And maybe this is just, I was, early 80s was kind of your first latchkey kids. Early on, it looked almost like Gregory lived by himself, because in the opening scenes, we never saw a mother or a father. We did see his father briefly, and I don't want to step on your driving review, but his father is a driving instructor, and his student is driving down the road, and they see Gregory, and he's crossing the road, and he lingers. He doesn't just shoot across like perpendicularly to the road. He kind of does this really long angle, putting himself in front of the car even longer. And the father doesn't react like, oh my God, turn to the right. Like, don't hit my kid. It was just like, he just sits there, doesn't really,
And please note that the driving student in that scene was an adult, right?
Right.
So, whereas here in the U.S., we're pretty comfortable, at least on the West Coast, right, with driving students being almost invariably 16-year-olds. Mm-hmm. Apparently, in Scotland, cars were too expensive or people didn't have a need or something. I don't know. And I also think it set up without us knowing it, so it didn't kind of land, but I think the intent there was to show that his father didn't really care that much about Gregory because he almost let a student run him over, because he knows it's his son.
Right.
And he's like making fun of him, and he lets the guy drive at him and almost hit him.
Right.
And then they have this interaction where his father says, I'd like to see you. Like, maybe we could meet at 8 o'clock for breakfast. So there's definitely something going on in that family, but it's not really explained. So we see a sister who is played by an actress named Alison Forster. She has no other IMDb credits, which is a shame because I feel like she stole this film. She was awesome, the little sister. You mentioned latchkey kids. These two, this boy and this girl, appear to live on their own.
Yeah, that's what they
No
looks
adult
like.
supervision.
Did we ever see a mother?
Nope. Didn't even hear about her.
Right. So it was just, and they're living almost in like a little courtyard of bungalows or something. And so.
Right. Decent housing for being broke kids.
Well, decent, but yet it looks like low income housing in a way.
For an adult it would be, but as kids, how would you possibly swing that?
And there are a ton of kids. Like there's a scene the next morning when he's walking to school, and I started to think, oh, is that like a preschool who are taking all the kids out for a walk? Because there's like 15 toddlers
over
and
a dozen.
Not one adult in view.
No. I don't know for sure, but I think one of the toddlers was smoking cigarettes.
It's a rough film. The 80s were rough. And then to continue kind of the very 80s kind of film, there's a scene with the players all standing in a line, and the coach is talking to them and kind of, he's acting more coach-like in this scene. And so they're dollying probably down the line of people, and one of them is literally picking their nose.
Oh, yeah.
And so it gave me a very Bad News Bears kind of feel. Like he has this ragtag group of players, and he's just hoping against all hope that they could win something. So I think that's why it's the 80s. So girls on a boy team wasn't a thing. And he is nervous, yet she has skills. So he's like, maybe we could use her on the team.
However, later on, there's a scene where porn stash soccer coach goes into the locker room where it's just him and the girl. Uh-huh. And that really gave me lots of creepy vibes.
That's the scene.
That's the scene that gave me creepy vibes?
No, yeah, that's what I'm asking. Is that the scene you were referencing earlier?
Yeah, that's the worst. That really, again, maybe in the 80s it played different, that there was a different sensibility and no one really noticed. But for me, I can't, I'm thinking as a director, if I make that film today, people are going to assume I'm setting up some sort of molestation of some sort.
Right. Yeah, that's true. So they are practicing soccer, and he is clumsily working on some calisthenics, and he's running, and he runs into her, and she is expertly, juggling the ball, and they kind of cross-cut between the two of them just to set up what a just clumsy boob he kind of is and how skilled she is.
And he's clumsy at everything.
Everything. Like earlier in the film, to kind of set that up, he's right after at the very beginning in that scene when we see him in the locker room, he puts deodorant on, but he puts it on his shirt.
The outside of the shirt. He'd put on his dress shirt, and then he puts the roll-on deodorant on the cloth.
On the shirt. And so it's just kind of, that's a very show don't tell. We're going to show you how kind of inept Gregory is.
My joke would be funnier if I could think of a really classic Scottish name, but this is Napoleon Dynamite for Scotland.
It is. Yeah, that's a good. There's another part that made me squirm a little bit. There's two men, one obviously much older than the other, and I believe they're doing some groundskeeping. And the teacher sees them.
Oh, these are the window washers.
Yeah. Oh, that's what they were doing. They were washing the windows.
Yeah. This is also insanely inappropriate.
This is your Mary Kay Letourneau warning. The teacher flirts with basically the younger boy who is a former student. He looks like he just graduated or could still be going to the school. And she literally says, "Why don't you come up and see me sometime?"
Yes, literally those words of dialogue.
It was just like, what is happening? Just blatantly in front of students and then his boss.
The other part that goes into the ew category is there is a kid who works for presumably the yearbook who is selling photos of the soccer girl in the boys' bathroom. And I would say that is unrealistic, except for the fact that one of the students at my high school, not Sergio Risti, but his name will remain unspoken, did the same thing. He was the kid who worked for the yearbook. He had the telephoto lens. He would take pictures of the girls, sometimes up their skirts, and he would print them out. So the behavior is I think believable for a teenager, but it's weird. Now there's parts of a lot of this film that don't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
There's a penguin, someone in a penguin costume who keeps being told to go to a different classroom. No clue what that means. There's a bit in the middle of the film, I think about 40 minutes in, where there's like a couple of, I think, young girls that has no bearing on the plot. They never were in there before or showed up again.
Yeah, my notes say the B plot of the grade school kids, question mark. And right. I was like, I don't even remember that.
It was just hard for me to follow along.
Yeah, this one was all over the map.
It was. Now,
I do love the relationship between him and his sister. They go to the park and they're on the merry-go-round, and his sister's giving him advice on how he better take care of himself if he's going to fall in love.
Yes. Now, there are a couple of movie tie-ins that I did enjoy. Mm-hmm. There's three.
Lay them on me.
The first one is, at one point, he says, or a character, I should say, says, crying himself to sleep over that, which reminded me of Mike Myers, and so I married an ex-murderer earlier this month with his crying himself to sleep comment. So apparently Scots worry a lot about crying themselves to sleep. I blame the English. The second one is, she says, Saturday nights are special, which I believe is an allusion to the Bay City Rollers' Saturday Night, which is, of course, a very famous song. And the third is, the actor who plays the soccer coach, Jake Darcy, was also in What We Did on Our Holiday, which we talked about recently. Mm-hmm. One of the confusing things involved food. What was it again?
So I think it's when he goes out with the interim girl.
Yeah, I think it's interim girl.
They go to a little, like, it almost looks like a convenience store / malt shop kind of. And she asks for a ginger beer. And when I get ginger beer, it basically looks like ginger ale. But what showed up in front of her was like this neon green milkshake. And I was just like, what?
Another
in
thing,
Scotland, ginger beer means something else, apparently.
Another thing that made no sense to me was they practice and play their soccer games on a dirt field adjacent to a grass field. Like, why wouldn't you play on the grass?
That's funny. So in the creepy category, there's a scene that both of us could not figure out what it meant. It bore nothing on the plot or the story, is the coach is showing her how to use her bum to kind of stop a ball with her butt.
Oh, yeah, that's in the locker room.
Yeah.
Yeah, super inappropriate.
It was like, what? And then it just like went to him and his sister or something. It was just, it did not make any sense. I did like when he's waiting. So he asks the soccer player girl out and she says yes. And she agrees to meet him. I believe it was at 2:00. And so we see Gregory and he's all cleaned up. His sisters coached him on how to get cute. And he's under this giant clock on the wall. Like literally, they're probably like 3 feet in diameter. And audibly, we hear tick, 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 tick to emphasize like that she's late. And there's just this uncomfortable silence except for the ticking. And we start to realize like, oh, I think he got stood up. Like we got excited that,
Except that when the, like, not even interim girl, but the intercessor shows up to tell him that soccer girl is not coming. My immediate thought was, how would that girl know? So I believe the implication was that they also went to soccer girl and said Gregory's not coming because they were trying to make room for their friend. Except show us that scene, Mr. Forsyth. That right. The absence of that scene confused me.
Yes. And so then it's funny because they go for a little, she goes, let's go for a walk. And they go for a little walk and she sees one of those very stereotypical kind of London phone booths, the red, kind of with the paned windows. Yeah. And she goes, just a second. And she goes in to change her clothes. It was like Superman. And she comes out and she's got now like a tank top. She's a little, not quite slutty, but just a little more racy. And
a little new wave.
And he's like, cover yourself up.
Right. It was amazing, that whole kind of Ocean's 11, activity to try to get this dork with this other girl. They didn't establish a motivation for why those girls would go to that much effort.
Right. Yeah.
Including a costume change.
Exactly. So then he agrees to go out on a date and they decide to go to the country park. And as they're walking through the park, you observed that his dumb buddies walk through every scene. They were at the chips because they went to a chip shop to get chips and they were at the park. And you said, there's Scotland's Jay and Silent Bob. Only this time, the tall, skinny one is the quiet one and the shorter one is the one that talks all the time.
If I was quicker, I would have said Jamie and Silent Rabby, but
it was still funny. It was still funny.
Yeah. Now that I think about it, though, the Silent Bob could be wearing a kilt. No, I think we could do this. I'll have to think about more.
So this is where maybe the filmmaker was trying to be a little creative. Gregory has the girl lay on her back. They're both laying on their back at the park, and they're looking up, and he says, "Now dance." Mm-hmm. And they basically start dancing while both looking straight up at the sky. The camera spins slowly to end up on like a Dutch tilt. And I wrote in my notes, what is going on here?
Yeah. Were we supposed to think they were high?
Right. And it turns to dusk and they're still dancing on their back. And I get like kind of in a Garden State kind of way, I could see like a Zooey Deschanel suggesting some back dancing. That sounds like a euphemism for something, but to do it for hours on end, I think I would grow tired of the back dancing.
Yeah, I think you're thinking of mattress dancing, which is a different thing. But from my own past, right, I did one time take a girl on a date where I could afford nothing beyond the free water at
a restaurant.
At a restaurant, yeah. So I could see how, especially because as we've established, the English have taken the Scots, so, and the Scots are poor, especially in the 80s, right? So he had no money, so I totally got him going to the park. What I didn't understand is he was in his friend's borrowed white jacket.
Yes!
And he's dancing on the grass. It seems like, from my time rolling around on the grass playing sport or whatever, it would be just destroyed, and his friend would be very angry, who, by the way, is a great cook they've established.
Yes.
This one friend, which is accurate because apparently some of the best chefs in Britain come from Scotland for some reason.
I love it how he went to the door of the principal and was like, what kind of pastries would you like tomorrow?
Yeah. He's a hustler.
Yeah. So he ends up kissing the neighbor and he reports the date to his sister. And then we see our Jay and Bob, our Scottish Jay and Bob, hiking to Caracas.
Yes.
And then we actually do see Dorothy again. She's running at night. like dip to black.
Yeah. She's running in full dark. There aren't street lamps back then.
Right.
By herself, no reflective gear, no pepper spray. How she lived long enough to get it back to the house or dorms, I don't know.
Well, and it made us very nervous because I do believe it went on for like a couple of cuts. So,
right.
And I was just like, oh God, something's going to happen to her.
Other movies made in 80s, when she ran through Central Park like that, she wouldn't live to the end of the movie, right? That was a very obvious.
Yeah. So odd film. It
was an odd film. I'm not sure what Siskel and Ebert were thinking.
Did we have any head trauma?
We do, in fact. At 36:30, the teacher throws a book at the student who's reading Shakespeare.
Oh, that's right. The teacher who then hit on the...
hit on the window cleaning student. Yes.
Great example of higher education in Scotland, apparently.
Yeah.
And do we get a smoochie by him?
We do.
Smoochie.
At 1 hour, 24 minutes, 22 seconds, Gregory kisses Susan after she walks him home. And Susan is the replacement girl. Right.
And I did kind of allude to a driving review, but did you have anything else to add?
Well, there's just two little bits of trivia. The 1980 Talbot Alpine, that is the car that his father is letting a guy try to run him down in, has a proper L card on the back, which is nice, good attention to detail from the props people. And then, totally bizarre, but in the background, there's a VW Bug with flames on it, but they're obviously been painted on with a rattle can, not with real paint. And so I thought, are they trying to tell us that this is how poor this neighborhood is, that they want the flames, but they can't afford a paint job, so they just do it themselves? Right. I don't know. It was really an odd touch.
I bet that they were just too poor to do it.
Yeah.
Should we go to the numbers?
Let's go to the numbers.
All right. This movie was made for £200,000 in 1980. So I did not do the math of what that would be for today's dollars. The IMDb score is 7.1. On Rotten Tomatoes, the critics they agreed with Siskel and Ebert. They gave it a 95%, yet the audience agreed more with us, I think, and giving it an 81%, still higher than maybe I would give it.
Yeah.
It's an hour and a half. It's rated PG. Now, that's probably like a 1980 PG.
Yeah, so there's full-on legitimate naked boobies in this film. So I'm not sure if he'll get PG today.
No, it'd have to be at least PG-13.
Yeah.
It's a teen comedy. We paused it twice, once to talk about the accents being dubbed, and then once to grab the pickup, many times to grab the pickup line. The opening weekend, it got 4,000 and sadly didn't do much better the rest of the time because worldwide, this movie made $7,000 or pounds, probably. Maybe dollars. I don't know. It did win the BAFTA for Screenplay and the London Critics Film Circle Award for Special Achievement. So a few people liked it.
Yeah.
Can't win them all.
They can't all be winners.
Well, we hope that we have entertained you for the last half hour in talking about Gregory's Girl. Now, I did run into somebody who saw this as well as Restless Natives. So it was not like I had never heard of this movie before, but there was other people.
So that viewer gets their cinemaphile merit badge.
Totally. I had never heard of this movie.
Right.
So there we go. All right, everybody. Join us next week when we kick off Made in Oregon movies. We've got 4 of those for you. Actually, technically 5, but more about that next time. Follow us on all of our social medias. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. Dodge Media Productions is the handle on most of those. And like us, review us. We are 2 reviews away from y'all getting to see Mike in his kilt. So if that happens by this airing, that will be on those social medias. So you're going to want to follow all of those handles, as they say. And never forget,
Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.
Thanks for listening to Dodge Movie Podcast with Christy and Mike Dodge of Dodge Media Productions. To find out more about this podcast and what we do, go to dodgemediaproductions.com. Subscribe, share, leave a comment, and tell us what we should watch next. Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.